Dr. Crickstall prided himself on being the finest veterinarian in the Outer Rim territories. His 6 arms moved with practiced precision as he organized his surgical instruments, each one gleaming under the artificial lights of his clinic aboard Station Nexus 7. The Zilithian had spent 43 standard years perfecting his craft, treating everything from Martian sand fleas to the occasional escaped zoo creature from the core worlds. His reputation was impeccable. When Ambassador Vexiron's prized crystalline sphinx had contracted lunar fungus, who did they call? Dr. Crickstall. When the station commander's pet bubble fish started molting out of season, causing a diplomatic incident with 3 species, who solved it? Dr. Crickstall, naturally. So when the clinic doors burst open with enough force to rattle his collection of interspecies medical certificates, Crickstall barely looked up from his inventory. Another dramatic pet owner, no doubt. They were all the same, really. A little space sickness, maybe some exotic parasites, nothing a professional couldn't handle. That confidence lasted exactly 12 seconds. Doctor, you have to help. The voice belonged to Thorpe, a Bengalian trader who ran an exotic pet shop 3 levels down. The amphibious alien was practically hyperventilating, his gill slits flapping frantically as he clutched a small carrier to his chest. It's Whiskers. He's been bitten. Crickstall set down his scanner and approached with professional calm. Now Thorpe, let's not panic. What exactly bit your Whiskers? He had to resist commenting on the name. Bengalians had no sense of creativity when it came to pet nomenclature. A Varathian shadow stalker. Thorpe's voice cracked like a teenager asking someone to prom. It got loose from a shipment, and Whiskers was in the wrong place at the wrong time. Every one of Crickstall's arms froze simultaneously. His primary heart skipped a beat, followed closely by his secondary heart deciding to join the panic party. Did you just say, a Varathian shadow stalker? Yes. Look at him. Thorpe opened the carrier, revealing a small furry creature that looked like someone had crossed a hamster with a cotton ball and given it anxiety issues. The little beast was shivering, with 2 tiny puncture wounds on its left hind leg. Crickstall's professional composure cracked like cheap hull plating under pressure. Thorpe, do you understand what you're telling me? A Varathian shadow stalker bite is universally fatal. Their venom is so potent it can kill a full-grown Rigelian battle rhino in under 3 hours. There is no antidote. No treatment. No hope. The color drained from Thorpe's already pale complexion. But surely you can do something. You're the best veterinarian in 7 sectors. I could be the best veterinarian in 7 galaxies, and it wouldn't matter. Crickstall replied grimly, pulling up his medical database on the wall display. Look at this. Varathian shadow stalker venom contains 47 different neurotoxins, each more deadly than the last. The mortality rate is 100%. The only variation is how long the victim suffers before. He trailed off as the sound of casual humming drifted from the corner of the room. Both aliens turned to see a human in a maintenance uniform, methodically mopping the floor with what could only be described as aggressive disinterest in their life or death drama. Jake Morrison had been working the night shift on Station Nexus 7 for about 8 months now, and in that time, he'd learned that alien medical emergencies were roughly as common as coffee breaks. Somebody was always dying from something that sounded made up. Space flu, quantum parasites, dimensional indigestion. It was like a soap opera, but with more tentacles and less attractive people. Jake paused his mopping and glanced over at the commotion. Varathian shadow stalker, huh? He said it the way someone might comment on the weather being slightly overcast. Yeah, those things are a pain. Got nailed by one of those last week. Or maybe it was the week before. Time kinda blurs together on the night shift, you know. The silence that followed was so profound that Jake could hear the station's life support systems humming 3 decks away. Dr. Crickstall's compound eyes bulged to roughly the size of dinner plates, while Thorpe made a sound like a deflating balloon with trust issues. I'm sorry, Crickstall said slowly, his voice barely above a whisper. Did you just say you were bitten by a Varathian shadow stalker? Yeah, little guy about this big. Jake held up his hands to indicate something roughly the size of a house cat. Black and purple, way too many teeth attitude problem. Bit me right on the forearm while I was cleaning out storage bay C. Thing had gotten into a shipment of Arcturian fruit or something. Thorpe's gills had stopped flapping entirely. He was either in a state of religious awe or clinical shock. Possibly both. But that's impossible, Crickstall stammered. You should be dead. Very, very dead. Extremely dead. Dead in ways that would require me to invent new categories of dead. Jake shrugged and leaned his mop against the wall. Well, I mean it hurt like hell. Felt like someone had injected liquid fire into my arm. But I cleaned it out with some antiseptic, slapped a bandage on it, and got back to work. Had to finish mopping the cargo bay before my shift ended. You cleaned it out with antiseptic, Crystal repeated, as if Jake had just claimed to have performed brain surgery with a spoon. Yeah, you know, the basic stuff. Hydrogen peroxide, little bit of iodine. Same thing I'd do for any animal bite back home. Jake rolled up his left sleeve with the casual air of someone showing off a new tattoo. See, barely even left a mark. On Jake's forearm was a small barely visible scar, maybe half an inch long. It looked like the kind of minor wound you'd get from a particularly aggressive house cat, not the bite of the galaxy's most feared predator. Thorpe made a sound like a squeaky toy being stepped on and promptly fainted, his unconscious form hitting the clinic floor with a wet thud. Well, that's new, Jake observed, looking down at the crumpled alien. Usually takes at least 15 minutes of conversation before beings start passing out around me. Dr. Crystal was staring at Jake's arm with the intensity of a scholar discovering a new law of physics. That's impossible. The neurotoxins alone should have caused systemic organ failure. The hemotoxins would have dissolved your blood vessels. The cytotoxins should have liquefied your cellular structure. Huh. Jake said thoughtfully. That explains why my arm felt tingly for a few days. Thought I might have slept on it wrong. Tingly. Crystal's voice reached a pitch that probably violated several noise ordinances. The venom of a Varathian shadow stalker contains compounds that make liquid nitrogen seem warm and cuddly. It's designed to kill creatures 10 times your size. Jake scratched his head, genuinely puzzled by the alien's distress. Look, Doc. I don't know what to tell you. Back on Earth, I've been bitten by plenty of things. Snakes, spiders, angry squirrels, my ex-girlfriend. This was maybe a 6 out of 10 on the pain scale. 7 if we're being generous. Your ex-girlfriend? Crystal asked weakly. Different story. Point is maybe your deadly space critter isn't as deadly as you think. I mean, Whiskers there looks like he's got the same kind of bite I had. 2 little puncture wounds. Some swelling. Probably feels like he got punched by a very small, very angry boxer. Crystal looked down at the unconscious Thorpe, then at the shivering Whiskers, then back at Jake's barely visible scar. His entire understanding of xenobiology was currently undergoing what could only be described as a complete structural collapse. You know, Jake continued, picking up his mop again, if you want I could take a look at the little guy. I mean, I'm not a vet or anything, but I've patched up plenty of animals back home. Had to. Growing up in Australia. Australia. Crystal whispered, and somehow the words sounded like a prayer and a curse rolled into one. Yeah. Nice place. Well, if you don't mind everything trying to kill you on a daily basis. But hey, builds character. Dr. Crystal sat down heavily in his chair, 4 of his 6 arms covering his face while the other 2 reached for what Jake assumed was either a medical scanner or a very strong drink. Jake glanced at his watch. A battered analog thing that had somehow survived 3 space stations and a minor asteroid collision. Look, Doc. I've got about 6 more hours left on my shift, and this floor isn't going to mop itself. How about I take a quick look at Whiskers while you help your friend there regain consciousness? Dr. Crystal's voice came out as a strangled whisper. You want to treat a patient who has been envenomed by the most lethal predator in known space. Well, when you put it like that, it sounds way more dramatic than it needs to be. Jake wheeled his janitor cart over and started rummaging through it with the confidence of someone who definitely knew what they were doing, or at least was very good at pretending. Let's see. Got some antiseptic wipes, basic bandages, hand sanitizer, and, oh perfect. He pulled out a small bottle of hot sauce with a label that featured a cartoon skull wearing sunglasses. What? Crystal asked in the tone of someone watching their worldview get fed through a paper shredder. Is that for emergency treatment? Jake replied. Matter-of-factly. Works great for infections. My buddy Rick swears by it. Course, Rick also once tried to wrestle a crocodile while drunk, so maybe take that with a grain of salt. You cannot be serious. Hey, capsaicin is a natural antiseptic. Plus it helps with circulation. Jake gently lifted Whiskers out of the carrier, and the little creature looked up at him with the sort of trust usually reserved for religious experiences. There we go, buddy. Let's get you fixed up. Crystal watched in horrified fascination as Jake began cleaning the bite wound with what appeared to be a standard antiseptic wipe. The kind of thing you'd find in any basic first aid kit. The kind of thing that, according to every medical textbook in the galaxy, should have been about as effective against Varathian shadow stalker venom as a strongly worded letter against a supernova. So anyway, Jake continued, gently dabbing at Whiskers' leg. Back home, we've got these things called box jellyfish. Sting from one of those can kill you in about 4 minutes. Real nasty pieces of work. But you know what the locals do when someone gets stung? Pray to their gods for a quick death. Crickstall suggested weakly. Nah, they dump vinegar on it. Plain old household vinegar. Works like a charm. Jake applied a small bandage to Whisker's leg with the practiced ease of someone who had clearly done this before. Many times. Course, we also had to deal with funnel web spiders, blue-ringed octopi, inland taipans, drop bears, vicious little monsters. Look like koalas, but with the temperament of a honey badger and the predatory instincts of a great white shark. Lost 3 tourists to drop bears my first year working at the nature preserve. Crickstall was beginning to suspect that either Jake was the most accomplished liar in the galaxy, or Earth was some sort of nightmare realm that somehow produced beings capable of treating galactic-class biotoxins with cleaning supplies. Meanwhile, Whiskers had stopped shivering. In fact, the little creature was starting to look around with something approaching normal curiosity, rather than the glassy-eyed stare of impending death that Crickstall had expected. That's not possible, the doctor stammered. The venom should be coursing through his system by now. His nervous system should be shutting down. His circulatory system should be collapsing. Well, he looks fine to me, Jake said, gently scratching behind Whisker's ears. The creature made a sound that was suspiciously close to purring. Little guy's got some fight in him. Reminds me of this wombat I had to patch up once. Thing had been mauled by a dingo, but it was back to digging holes within a week. On the floor, Thorpe was beginning to stir, making small groaning sounds that suggested consciousness was returning whether he wanted it to or not. Jake, Crickstall said slowly, what exactly do you do back on Earth? I mean your actual profession. Oh, bit of everything. Really. Worked at a wildlife preserve for a few years, did some animal rescue, little bit of veterinary assistance. Nothing fancy. Jake was now offering Whiskers a small piece of what looked like dried fruit from his pocket. When you grow up in Australia, you learn to deal with dangerous animals, or you don't grow up at all. It's kind of a natural selection thing. Natural selection, Crickstall repeated faintly. Yeah, great system. Really weeds out the slow learners. Jake looked up as Thorpe finally managed to sit up, looking around with the confused expression of someone who had just woken up from a very strange dream. Oh hey there buddy, good news. Whiskers is going to be fine. Thorpe blinked slowly, looked at his pet, who was now energetically grooming himself. Then looked at Jake. Then looked at Dr. Crickstall, who was staring at his medical degree on the wall as if it had personally betrayed him. How? Thorpe croaked. Turns out, Jake said, putting Whiskers back in his carrier, your deadly space predator is about as dangerous as an angry house cat. At least, to anything that survived a childhood in the Australian outback. Dr. Crickstall pulled up his galactic database with trembling hands, typing Earth into the search parameters. The results that appeared on his screen made his primary heart stop and his secondary heart seriously consider filing for early retirement. Classification, Death World. Class 12, he read aloud, his voice barely above a whisper. Gravity. 1.2 standard. Atmospheric composition, highly corrosive oxygen-nitrogen mixture. Dominant species, Homo sapiens. Survival rating, impossible. Jake looked up from where he was giving Whiskers a final check. Oh yeah, I keep forgetting you aliens think our planet is some kind of hellscape. Always found that funny, considering we have tourism and everything. Tourism. Crickstall's voice cracked. You have tourism to a Class 12 death world. Well sure, Disney World, the Grand Canyon, Australia. Though I guess Australia might be pushing it for off-worlders. Jake scratched his chin thoughtfully. Come to think of it, most aliens I've met wouldn't last 5 minutes in a typical Australian suburb. Thorpe was now holding Whiskers, who appeared to be completely recovered, and was attempting to eat his owner's fingers in what could only be described as an aggressively affectionate manner. But how is this possible? The medical texts are very clear about Varathian shadow stalker venom. Well, Jake said, settling into what was clearly storytelling mode. Let me put it this way. When I was 12, I got bit by a eastern brown snake. Third most venomous snake on the planet. Enough toxins to kill about 20 people. My dad looked at the bite, said she'll be right, and drove me to the hospital. Took about 40 minutes, because we stopped for gas, and he wanted to grab a meat pie. And you survived? Crickstall asked, though at this point he was beginning to suspect the answer. Oh yeah, barely even made me sick. Course that was nothing compared to the time I got stung by a box jellyfish during a school trip. Now that hurt. Jake winced at the memory. Felt like someone was using my leg as a lightning rod during a thunderstorm. But you dumped some vinegar on it. Maybe take an aspirin, and you're good to go. Dr. Crickstall was rapidly scrolling through more data on his screen. According to this, Earth's oceans contain creatures capable of killing most known species with a single touch. Your land masses are populated by predators that outclass military-grade weapons. Your insects carry diseases that could wipe out entire planets. Yeah, the mozzies can be pretty annoying, Jake agreed. Though personally I think the drop bears are worse. At least with mosquitoes, you can see them coming. This says here that your species regularly engages in recreational activities that involve jumping from aircraft, diving to crushing depths, and deliberately seeking contact with apex predators. Oh, you mean skydiving and scuba diving? Yeah, that stuff's fun. Great way to spend a weekend. Jake paused. Though I guess bungee jumping might seem a bit extreme to someone who didn't grow up dodging huntsman spiders the size of dinner plates. Thorpe had gone very quiet, staring at Jake with the sort of expression usually reserved for natural disasters or religious experiences. You've been bitten by snakes that could kill 20 people. Well, yeah, but that's just Tuesday in Queensland. I mean, my neighbor Mrs. Patterson got bit by a redback spider while hanging laundry, and she just complained about it for a week. Didn't even go to the doctor. Said it wasn't worth the trip unless something was actually falling off. Something falling off, Crickstall whispered. You know, like a finger or a toe. Mrs. Patterson's pretty tough though. She once fought off a dingo with a garden hose and a bad attitude. Doctor. Crickstall looked at his wall full of medical degrees, his sophisticated scanning equipment, his comprehensive pharmaceutical supplies, and then looked at Jake's janitor cart with its antiseptic wipes and bottle of hot sauce. So let me understand this, he said slowly. You come from a planet so dangerous that your medical treatment for what we consider universally fatal toxins is household cleaning supplies. Pretty much. I mean, we've got hospitals and stuff for the really serious injuries, like if you get attacked by a cassowary or step on a stonefish. But for everyday bites and stings, Jake shrugged. Band-Aid and some antiseptic usually does the trick. Cassowary? Thorpe asked weakly. 6-foot-tall murder bird with claws like daggers and the temperament of a tax auditor having a bad day. They can disembowel you faster than you can say I probably shouldn't have gotten this close to take a selfie. Jake checked his watch again. Anyway, Whiskers there should be fine. Just keep the wound clean, maybe give him some extra treats. He's been through a bit of trauma. Doctor. Crickstall stared at the fully recovered pet, then at Jake, then at his medical equipment that suddenly seemed about as useful as a chocolate teapot. Jake, he said finally, would you consider a career change? Word travels fast on a space station, especially when that word involves someone miraculously curing what everyone believed to be an incurable condition using janitor supplies and casual indifference to mortal peril. By the next morning, Jake found himself facing a line of aliens stretching halfway around level 7, each clutching a pet carrier and looking at him with the sort of desperate hope usually reserved for lottery tickets and last-minute miracle cures. Right, Jake said, looking at the queue while sipping coffee from a mug that read World's Okayest Employee. I'm guessing word got out about yesterday. Dr. Crickstall appeared at his elbow, looking like someone who had spent the night questioning every life choice that had led to this moment. Jake, there are 47 beings out there with pets suffering from conditions I've classified as terminal. They're calling you the miracle worker of maintenance. That's catchy. I like it better than hey you mop guy. Jake surveyed the crowd with the practiced eye of someone who had clearly dealt with unusual situations before. All right, let's see what we're working with. The first customer was a Regilian whose pet fluxworm had contracted something called crystalline plague. According to Dr. Crickstall's panicked explanation, this disease turned the victim's internal organs into actual crystals over a period of days, and there was no known treatment. Jake looked at the small rainbow-colored creature that was indeed looking rather more sparkly than seemed healthy. Huh, looks like mineral buildup. We get this sometimes back home with aquarium fish. He rummaged through his cart and produced a bottle of white vinegar. Bit of this in his water should clear that right up. That's acetic acid. Crickstall protested weakly. You can't just treat crystalline plague with household vinegar. Why not? It's basically just calcium deposits, right? Same stuff that builds up in coffee makers. Jake added a few drops to the creature's water dish. Give it about 6 hours, little guy should be back to normal. The next case involved a Centaurian sandcat that had been stung by what Dr. Crickstall described in apocalyptic terms as a nebula wasp, whose venom caused progressive paralysis starting from the extremities and working inward until respiratory failure occurred. Jake examined the slightly sluggish feline equivalent and nodded knowingly. Yeah, we've got wasps like this back home. European wasp, nasty little buggers. He pulled out an ice pack from his seemingly infinite cart of mundane miracles. Cold compress should bring the swelling down, bit of antihistamine if you've got it. Though I guess alien antihistamine might be different. I have some Zolithian anti-inflammatory compound, Crystal offered weakly. Perfect. Same principle. Jake applied the ice pack while Crystal administered what was essentially alien Benadryl. Should be right as rain in a few hours. By the third patient, a Jovian gas toad suffering from what sounded like space leprosy but was apparently treated with hand sanitizer and encouraging words. Doctor. Crystal had stopped protesting and started taking notes. I don't understand, he muttered, watching Jake treat a case of fatal mite infestations with what appeared to be diluted dish soap. I spent decades learning xenobiology, interspecies anatomy, advanced pharmaceutical chemistry. How are you curing terminal illnesses with cleaning supplies? Well, Jake said, gently washing the affected creature while it made happy chirping sounds, maybe the problem is that you're overthinking it. I mean, a parasite is a parasite, right? Doesn't matter if it's from Earth or Alpha Centauri. You kill parasites with soap and water, treat infections with antiseptic, reduce swelling with cold and hope for the best. But the molecular complexity, the species variations, the biochemical incompatibilities. Doc, I once saved a echidna that had been poisoned by eating a cane toad by giving it activated charcoal and keeping it hydrated. Sometimes the simple solution is the right solution. Jake looked up from his work. Plus, back home if you can't fix something with duct tape, WD-40, or a good strong cup of tea, it probably can't be fixed. The queue continued to move with alarming efficiency. Jake treated what he diagnosed as space mange with medicated shampoo, cured dimensional flux syndromes with electrolyte solution, and addressed quantum parasites with what appeared to be deworming tablets. He'd somehow produced from the depths of his cart. Dr. Crystal watched his entire medical practice become obsolete in real time. This is impossible. You're curing diseases that have stumped the greatest medical minds in the galaxy. Maybe that's the problem, Jake suggested, applying a simple bandage to a creature that looked like a cross between a ferret and a disco ball. Sometimes the greatest medical minds forget that basic principles work across species. Clean the wound, reduce inflammation, support the immune system, don't overthink it. By hour 4, Jake had successfully treated 32 cases of supposedly terminal alien pet diseases, used approximately half his cleaning supplies, and somehow managed to maintain his usual level of cheerful indifference to the mounting evidence that he was single-handedly revolutionizing interspecies veterinary medicine. You know, he said to Dr. Crystal as they watched the last customer leave with a fully recovered pet that had apparently been cured of temporal parasites with basic probiotics. This is actually pretty fun. Reminds me of working at the animal shelter back home. Dr. Crystal stared at his medical scanner, which had been completely useless for the entire morning. Jake, I think I need to ask you something important. Shoot, would you consider letting me become your apprentice? 3 weeks later, Jake Morrison found himself sitting behind a desk in what used to be Dr. Crystal's private office, wearing a maintenance uniform with a shiny new badge that read Interspecies Trauma Specialist. He'd tried to explain to Station Command that he preferred Senior Custodial Engineer, but apparently Miracle Worker looked better on official paperwork. Crystal, meanwhile, had embraced his new role as apprentice with the enthusiasm of someone who had discovered that everything they thought they knew was completely wrong, and somehow found this liberating rather than terrifying. Jake, Crystal said, entering the office with a clipboard and the eager expression of a student who had finally found a subject that made sense. We have a new case. Tyrellian merchant brought in his prize singing crystal, that's apparently been infected with silent death plague. Silent death plague. Jake looked up from his morning coffee, which he'd somehow managed to upgrade from station standard swill to something approaching drinkable. That sounds ominous. What's it do? According to my old medical texts, it causes progressive loss of crystalline resonance, followed by complete harmonic failure, ending in molecular dissolution. Crystal paused, which translated from medical jargon, means the crystal stops singing and then crumbles to dust. Ah. Jake nodded sagely. So basically it's got a throat infection. I suppose that's one way to look at it. Right. Let's have a look then. Jake grabbed his cart, which had been officially upgraded to mobile treatment unit, but was still fundamentally a janitor cart with delusions of grandeur. Got any warm salt water? Salt water. Crystal consulted his notes. For silent death plague. Works great for sore throats. Same principle should apply to singing crystals. Jake wheeled his cart toward the treatment room. Gargle with salt water. Maybe add a bit of honey if we've got any. Crystal should be humming again by tomorrow. They found the Tyrellian merchant pacing nervously beside a container holding what looked like a large translucent gemstone that was making occasional sad wheezing sounds instead of the apparently melodious tones it was supposed to produce. "Ah, you must be the famous human healer," the merchant said, his forearms gesturing dramatically. "Please, you must save my Harmony. She's been in my family for 12 generations." Jake peered at the crystal, which definitely looked like it was having a rough time. "Yeah, I can see the problem. She's all congested, poor thing." He mixed up a solution of warm water and salt in a clean container. "Let's get her a nice soak, clear out whatever's blocking her resonance chambers." "You're going to bathe her?" the merchant asked, sounding like someone who had expected complex surgery and gotten told to take 2 aspirin and call in the morning. Basic treatment for any kind of throat problem. "Trust me, I've gargled enough salt water in my life to know." Jake gently lowered the crystal into the solution. Had to do this all the time during flu season back home. Within minutes, the crystal began producing small clear notes. By the end of the hour, she was singing a melody that made the merchant weep tears of joy and probably violated several noise ordinances. "It's a miracle," the merchant exclaimed, cradling his recovered crystal. "How can I ever repay you? Just make sure she gets plenty of rest and maybe ease up on the high notes for a few days," Jake advised. "Throat needs time to heal properly." After the grateful merchant left, Dr. Crickstall updated his growing collection of notes on what he had started calling applied human logic. The file was getting quite thick. "Jake," he said thoughtfully, "I've been analyzing your treatment methods, and I think I'm beginning to understand the pattern." "Oh yeah? What's that?" "You treat every condition as if it were a common Earth ailment with an obvious Earth solution. Parasites get soap, infections get antiseptic, inflammation gets ice, and throat problems get salt water. Pretty much." Jake was already preparing for the next patient. A case involving something called dimensional fleas, that he was planning to address with flea shampoo and optimism. "I mean, biology is biology, right? Doesn't matter if you're dealing with a dog or a sentient crystal. Basic principles stay the same. But what about the complex biochemistry? The species-specific metabolic pathways? The molecular incompatibilities that should make cross-species treatment impossible?" Jake paused in his preparation, and looked at his apprentice with the patient expression of someone explaining something very simple to someone very smart. "Doc, you know what the most important thing I learned working with animals back home was?" "What?" "Sometimes you've got to stop thinking like a doctor and start thinking like the animal. What does it need? What's bothering it? What would make it feel better?" Jake shrugged. "Turns out most living things want pretty much the same stuff. To not hurt, to not be scared, and to go back to doing whatever it is they normally do." Dr. Crickstall considered this profound wisdom while Jake began setting up for the next case. It occurred to him that in all his years of medical training, no one had ever suggested that the solution to complex interspecies medicine might be to treat it as if it weren't complex at all. "Jake," he said finally, "there's just one thing I still don't understand." "What's that?" "Your biggest concern yesterday was whether you'd have time to finish mopping level 5 before your shift ended. Today you're the most sought-after veterinarian in 3 sectors. How are you not more impressed with yourself?" Jake looked up from his preparations, genuinely considering the question. "Well, I mean, it's nice that I can help and all. But at the end of the day, I've still got floors to mop, right? Can't let the maintenance standards slip just because I accidentally became good at fixing space pets." And with that, Jake Morrison, interspecies trauma specialist and senior custodial engineer, went back to the business of revolutionizing galactic medicine, one common-sense solution at a time, secure in the knowledge that no matter how many impossible cures he performed, there would always be floors that needed mopping and humans, who somehow made the impossible look routine. After all, that's just what humans did.